Hey, it's Herb Stevens, the skiing weatherman, with another installment of Weather Weenies. Today I'm coming to you from the deck outside the lodge at Whiteface in Lake Placid. And it's been quite a day here at Whiteface. We've had sunshine and warmth, we've had wind, we've had heavy snow squalls. And I'll tell you something, Whiteface got a little surprise this past weekend. This is being taped on the Ides of March, Monday the 15th of March. And this past weekend there was a massive storm in the eastern United States. 2 weeks ago we had a massive storm and we had massive amounts of snow because we had just enough cold air in the mountains for it to come down in the form of snow. This time most resorts weren't so lucky. Most eastern resorts took a pretty good hit of rain, but the high elevation spots, today we're at Whiteface in the Adirondacks, they've had about 4 or 5 inches of snow from this storm, and they were so far north they didn't get hardly anything else besides snow. Windham Mountain in the Catskills checked in with 8 to 10 inches of snow in this deluge that took place over the weekend in the eastern United States. And I think you'll check, if you check snowcountry.com, you'll see that earlier in the week there was some pretty good snowfall amounts along the spine of the Green Mountains, up in the White Mountains close to the Presidential Range, and also at the higher resorts in the state of Maine. They escaped from this one, while mid-Atlantic resorts and down in the Appalachians all the way down to North Carolina, they took a pretty good hit of rain, and I'm sure there have been some trail losses, but they had so much snow. Don't worry about them closing. There will be very few closures as a result of this storm. Now, I want to take a look ahead. I mean, that's the purpose of this piece. And I want to point out that the last month or so, Canada has been very warm. This 5SD is 5 standard deviations above normal. That's where temperatures were for much of the month of February and the early part of March. And suffice it to say that that means it's been pretty darn warm in a source area where we derive our cold air from. And if we don't have a source area like that, we end up with milder than normal temperatures, and that's what happened in the east. We ran out of cold air with this latest storm, except in the highest elevations. But there have been some changes in the jet stream pattern, and believe it or not, this is the state of Alaska. Here's the Aleutians, and here's the body of Alaska. It's not drawn to scale. It's further north, but it's part of the story this week because most of February and into early March, there was a big trough of low pressure over Alaska, and that supported this wide ridge that covered Canada. And eventually it dropped down into an eastern trough, but again, it just didn't have any cold air to deliver. Until this thing got out of the way, this ridge was just going to hang out over Canada and deprive us of cold air. In the last week, this system has dropped to the south. It's basically off the British Columbia coast, and that has allowed this ridge to retrogress to the west, and we now have the developing sizable ridge in northwestern Canada. These standard deviations have come down to about 1 in most of Canada. So Canada is cooling down with relation to normal. And with the ridge developing, by the weekend of the 20th and 21st, we're going to see a cold front cutting through the Midwest, the Great Lakes, and eventually to the East Coast by about the 22nd. It's going to deliver the first bona fide shot of Arctic air that the East has seen in about a month. And that's going to be the last chance. When that Arctic air gets in place, the week of the 22nd looks like the last chance for romance in the east in terms of major snow, and that includes the upper Midwest as well. Before this front cuts through, over the weekend of the 20th and 21st, low pressure from the southern plains is going to cut up through the eastern Great Lakes, and anywhere west of that track, and I'm talking about the ski areas in the upper peninsula of Michigan and Wisconsin and Minnesota, looks like they're going to get a shot of natural snow. They haven't had much in the last month or so. That looks like a pretty good chance for them. And then the cold air sweeps in and moves all the way to the coast. Next week, again, looks like the big chance for snow in the east, if there's going to be one in the remainder of this season. Meanwhile, out in the west, we've had low pressure with this ridge weakening. Now, it's strengthening in Canada, but the last couple of weeks it's been kind of weak in the west. And that means low pressure has been able to penetrate past these coastal ranges. The Sierra have done pretty well with snow this year. The Wasatch and then the Rockies in Colorado, they've been a little lean at times because these systems have run into the ridge that was sitting out here and they run out of gas. Well, the last couple of weeks, the systems have made it inland further. I expect that to be the case for this week, the week of the 15th. But once this ridge pokes up again, it's going to poke down into the Rockies and slow down the train of storms. But lately, the Rockies have done pretty well. Colorado's gotten healthy over the last couple of weeks. Earlier this week, actually it was the weekend of the 13th and the 14th, Brian Head down in southern Utah got about 28 inches of snow. The Wasatch got tagged pretty well on the 12th and the 13th. So the situation is good out here. Packed powder dominates, but again, the central and southern Rockies, we always talk about this in the springtime. The sun angle starts to get high and those lower elevation trails turn into spring snow pretty early in the day. The powder is still dominating up on high though. So the week of the 22nd, the eastern half of the country will be colder than normal, and if we can get something to come along in the southern stream and hook up with a trough in the east, we could get one last snowstorm in the east. After that, though, it looks to me, and I gotta stand up for this, that a ridge out here in the Atlantic, this has been the block that has kept the trough in place here in the east most of the winter. This is going to retrograde to the west because this piece went to the west, left room for a trough in the middle of the country, and as this block comes west, this trough will weaken, and eventually by about Easter, we're going to have a predominantly zonal flow or west to east flow across the country, and spring will have arrived. And after that, it looks as though any cold air will remain locked up in Canada. So we've got one more shot for substantial snow in the east. We should have a couple more here in the Rockies and in the coastal ranges, the Cascades and the Sierra. But after some nice spring skiing this week, we got another shot at some pack powder next week. That's it. And the base snow that you have in place by the time you get to the 1st of April is going to have to do you for however long you want to stay open as a ski resort. But these eastern resorts, even the Appalachian resorts, have enough snow that if you're planning on skiing or riding at Easter, you shouldn't have any problem. But always call ahead to check because the rain that fell this past weekend was fairly substantial. The news isn't bad, but finally we're going to break this pattern. And if you're ready for spring like some of us are, and I think I can honestly say I'm ready for spring, it's on the way. We got one more shot of cold. I'm Herb Stevens, the Skiing Weatherman. The next installment of Weather Weenies, the final one of the season, will come to you next week from Killington, Vermont. Have a great week.